few weeks ago, I reviewed the Timex Marlin Automatic, a brilliant but perhaps a little overpriced throwback to the classic Marlins, although this time in a larger 40mm. Now for me, the closest competitor in both style and price is going to be the Orient Bambino line. And that Orient Bambino line has actually expanded a bit this last year since I last reviewed this one. So while I will occasionally reference the other Bambinos, this is specifically comparing the Timex Marlin to my Gen 2 version 2 Bambino in rose gold. Now if you've seen my other comparison videos, you'll have an idea how this will work. I'll compare both of these watches over 10 categories and award a single point to the winner of each category. And after that, I should have a clear idea of which is the better watch from a more analytical approach. And after that, I'll compare that to my own personal opinion on the two. So let's get started by first looking at the specs of both watches. So spec-wise, they're pretty similar, with the Bambino being 0.5 millimeter wider and a little thinner, but its lugs are also a little shorter. Weight-wise, the Bambino is actually 9 grams heavier, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you look at both, it's actually 20% heavier. And I can say that the Bambino definitely has a more solid feel in the hand. The Marlin feels almost too light, although they are both supposedly made of stainless steel. Design-wise, they're both rather rounded, but the Marlin has more of a bowl-shaped feel to it, while the Bambino is more of a thinner disc, which is aided by the Bambino's brushed flat finished edge that goes around the case, and goes to the top until it meets a more plain polished bezel, before that hits the mineral crystal. Whereas the Marlin is more of a simple rounded bowl until it hits its polymer crystal. While the materials are different, they both have very nice, very large domed crystals, each with a slightly different effect. On the Bambino, it looks almost like a bubble rising out from its case, whereas with the Marlin, it actually looks like a continuation of that case, which I think is a really nice touch on the Marlin. The crowns are also very different. The Marlin's is more of a contemporary rounded shape, but feels almost as if it were plated, where the Bambino has a classic onion or half onion shape to it and has a much better feel. Although it's worth pointing out that not every Bambino has this type of crown. The other biggest differences is in the case backs. The Marlin has an exhibition case back where you can see its Miyota movement, while the Bambino is a simple closed case back, which may be a negative to some. For me, I have to say that the Bambino has a better case, and thus gets the point. Having a better finishing, as well as having a thinner case, I think being the major factors. Now as for the straps, well, this is an easy one. The Marlin comes with this rather good brown leather strap. Now Timex's best straps come from the SB Foot Tanning Company, and they are included on watches such as the Waterbury, and those are a little bit better, but this one is still pretty good. And as I pointed out in the review, at this price, you really should have a good strap on your watch. So unless you really want a different look, you really wouldn't have to change it on the Timex Marlin. But in the event that you want to, it does use 20mm straps, so plenty of options. In contrast, the Bambino strap is notorious, not for its quality, but for its size, using 21mm straps, which are much harder to find. So the strap it comes with is okay, and should last a while, but I don't think it's very good, and it wasn't on mine for very long. Now I've gone through a few straps since I've had my Bambino. The first was a rather cheap one I got off eBay with a deployment clasp, and it's okay. But I've recently upgraded to this one from Dasari, and I have to say that having a really good strap on the Bambino makes a world of difference. But we aren't talking strap options as much as scoring the stock straps, which I have to say is an easy win for the Marlin. Although I do need to point out that the version 4 Bambino actually uses 22mm straps as well as having a slightly bigger case. So on to the movement. The Timex's Marlin uses the tried, true, and maybe a little old Miyota 8215, while the Orient uses their in-house F6724 movement. Overall, I think they're rather similar. They both have standard beat rates, hand winding, and a 40-ish hour power reserve. But where the Orient comes out on top is that it is hackable. Although if you have an older Bambino where it's a Gen 1, you don't have that. So for me alone, hacking is enough reason to give the Bambino the point here. So on to what I call functionality and usability. Now with regards to functionality, there really isn't any differences between these two. They're both dress watches with day complications, nothing really different. So we're more looking at the usability, which is going to be which of these two is easier to read and use. Now again, I'm comparing the Marlin specifically to my Gen 2 V2 Bambino. So the results might be different if you were to compare it to another Bambino, like say the small seconds. Although I think here that I have to call this a tie. They're both very similar when it comes to its usability and readability. I never had an issue with either one being rather reflective. Not to mention the hands and dial on both of them offer really good contrast, making them very easy to read. So I don't really see any distinct advantage of one over the other. Although if anything, the Marlin does have lume, but it's barely usable. And I think that advantage disappears when you look at the date window. The Marlin's is so small it's really hard to read, whereas the Bambino's is nice and clear, so to me, this is a tie. So on to versatility, which I usually define as how many different situations you can use your watch in, which here is going to be more about wearing it as a dress watch as well as a casual watch. And I think the Marlin has a distinct advantage here. Both watches would look fine as dress pieces, but I think the Bambino would look a little off in t-shirts and jeans. The Roman numerals and rose gold hands just don't say casual to me. Although if this is one of the other Bambinos, I think this might be a different story, especially if it was the newer version 5. Not to mention that I think my new strap does make it look a little more casual. But here, I think the Marlin easily gets the point. On to durability, which I think is an easy win for the Bambino. But I think some people are going to have a problem with what I'm about to say, as it's the very same argument I had in my Seiko versus Vostok videos. Basically, it comes down to a polymer versus mineral crystal argument. For some, polymer is better, as you can easily buff out any scratches yourself. But for me, durability isn't about how easy it is to repair something as much as never needing to repair it in the first place. So I think the Bambino's mineral crystal, not to mention it has a thinner, shorter case, I think will help it avoid many more scratches in the long run. Now durability should also include the movements, but I would say that both of these movements are on par with each other, so that's not a factor, and thus the Bambino I think gets the point. On to what I call perceived quality, which is really the odds of getting a watch with a quality control problem, or if you do get one, how easy is it to remedy that situation. And I think this is important these days as we are often buying things sight unseen on the internet. Now Orient has a really good reputation for quality, and I've only ever heard a few complaints. And as long as you're buying it from Orient or an authorized dealer like Amazon, you shouldn't have a problem sending it back if there is an issue. Although if you bought it off eBay or an unauthorized seller, that's a whole other story. Now if you compare that to Timex, where right now you can buy the Marlin from them and a couple of other sources, but not too many. So again, it should be rather easy to return if there is an issue. But when it comes to quality, I think Timex is an unknown quantity here. This is their first automatic that they've made in decades. Not to mention that when I took a closer look with my macro lens, I did notice some fine scratches that I didn't notice before. So for me, this is an easy win for the Orient, as I think they have a proven track record of putting out great products. So on to design, which is ultimately decided on how you feel about the V2 Bambino. Now some people love this design, and other people can't stand it. It's way too busy with its minute indicators and train track chaptering, and they'd be much happier with say a V3 or a V4 Bambino with a much cleaner dial. Now I originally wanted the V4 Bambino with the slate gray dial, but before I could buy that one, I happened to find this one on eBay that was in mint condition, and I happened to get it for a little over half of what a new one would cost me. Now I'm not really a rose gold person, so I thought I'd buy it, review it, then sell it and get the Bambino I wanted. But somewhere along the way, I actually fell in love with this one, and I haven't really looked at that slate gray one since. Not to mention that I've fallen in love with the off-white satin sheen of the dial. In contrast, the Marlin is rather well done. It has a beautiful silver sunburst dial with nicely made black indices. It's a classic, simple design inspired by the Marlins of the past. They currently have this model and a few others, including an optional Beagle model. But if I'm being honest, I would have rather preferred a larger version of the mechanical they made last year, where it has Arabic numerals and no date. Overall, they both have a very similar feel. Both have sunburst dials and have a dressy, domed crystal giving it a vintage aesthetic. But it's the small details here that make the difference. Now, design is rather subjective, but for me I prefer the Bambino. I really love the elegant but complicated looking dial. It has the ability to be precise and look good doing it. Not to mention, on closer examination, I believe the execution of the Bambino's design is much better. There's no rough edges or marks to be seen like on the Timex. So the second to last category is uniqueness, and I think this is an easy one. Now generally, if you're talking about an Orient to the general public, they're not going to have any idea what you're talking about. So usually, an Orient would be a shoo-in for this category, especially against a watch that has Timex on its dial. But the Marlin Timexes are special. Timex stopped making mechanical movements in the 80s, so mechanical and automatic Timexes are something special and unique right now, which, as I said in my review, is primarily the reason to buy one. It is a connection to the past, not just to Timex's past, but to Americana as a whole. So here, I think the Marlin deserves the point for uniqueness. So the last category we have is value, which isn't just about price, but more about what you're getting for that price. Now, Orient is known for value. It's harder to find another brand that can give you as much bang for your buck in terms of quality, and the Bambino is no different, with most Bambino models costing you around $130 to $150. On the other hand, the Timex Marlin is sitting at $250. And while its design is unique and special, its quality not so much. And there is a lot of competition at that price for other dress watches. Not to mention that you can often find some Chinese watches with the exact same movement, and those can be had for usually around $60. Granted, those won't have as good a finishing or as good a strap, but for $200 less, I think that's something most people can live with. Needless to say, value is not the Marlin's strong suit, so I think it's an easy win for the Orient here. Which brings the total score to 4 versus 7, with the Orient Bambino coming out on top. And I have to say that I agree. I mean, there's a reason that the Bambino line is as popular as it is, and it's the same reason that Orient has expanded that line aggressively this year with 3 new versions. And that's not to say the Marlin is a bad watch, it's actually pretty decent. It's just the main reason for buying one has more to do with its connection to Timex and its history than the actual watch itself. And if you don't really care about that, it's really hard to give you a good reason to pick one up at its current price. Now, if it was $50 or $100 cheaper, that might be a different story, but it is what it is here. But if that's a style you're interested in, I think you'd be better off buying a Bambino and hunting down a better strap. Now, let me know what you think about all this. Did I get it right, or is there something about the Marlin I completely missed? As well as which of the new Bambinos are you most interested in? If I happen to pick one up later in the year, would you rather see a small seconds, an open heart, or one of the new version 5s? Personally, I'm leaning towards a small seconds. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you again.